This is the Italian Real Estate Podcast, here to help you with the ins and outs and basics of Italian real estate, presented by ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com. Hello there, and welcome to another edition of the Italian Real Estate Podcast. Of course, we are back at it again with Italian attorney Marco Permunian from ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com. How are you doing, man?
Very good. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. And today, we wanted to get into the topic of buying land that you can build on, and not just buying the land, but also building. Like, what can you do? What can you not do? What are some of the restrictions? And get into this process, because there are so many people that want to move to Italy, but to have a little bit more of a customized experience. I mean, I can't blame them to have a home just the way you want. There are some people that maybe want to redo a ruin, but then there are some people that maybe want to knock down a home that maybe it's not quite a ruin, and then just build a home that meets their needs exactly to what they hope to have in their life. Anyway, Marco, maybe I think it might be worthwhile just very quickly describing the purchasing process, because we've described the purchasing process in the past. But if a person wants to go buy a piece of land, do they need any special permissions? Do they need to keep anything in mind when they're looking for this property? And what does that property purchasing process look like?
First of all, the process of purchasing a piece of land in Italy is the same process as purchasing a property that is already built. So the steps of the process are the same. And it's also worthwhile mentioning that anybody, any foreigner, can buy a piece of land in Italy, just like anybody can buy a property in Italy. I should say most foreigners, for sure, Americans and those countries that Italy has a very close relationship with. There are some foreign nationals that can only buy a piece of land or property in Italy if there is the so-called reciprocity. So only if that country allows Italians to buy there, then only in that case people from there will be allowed to buy in Italy. But these are special circumstances, rare circumstances, and exceptions. The vast majority of foreign nationals can just buy properties, so pieces of land or properties that are already built in Italy without going through any special permissions, or they can just go to Italy and jump into the purchase process.
So just because the majority of our viewers and listeners are from the US, there is that reciprocity between the US and Italy, if I'm not mistaken, so that, or even Canada, so that these people actually would be able to come and purchase property in Italy really without any restriction, correct?
Exactly. But going back to your question, so what is the process? It's the same process that a person would have to go through if they were purchasing a property that is already built. So you have to submit a formal offer, you have to wait for the offer to be accepted, and then you enter into a preliminary agreement. If you are from abroad, it could be advisable to use an attorney or a consultant or somebody like us to navigate this process, especially because all the paperwork is in Italian and you want to be sure that you're taking the right steps. But going back to the process, once you have entered into the preliminary agreement, you set the date for the closing, for the final agreement, which must be signed necessarily before a public notary. And in between the preliminary agreement that you don't have to sign before a notary and the final agreement, which you must sign by law before a notary, you can conduct your due diligence, request a mortgage if you have to. If you're not a cash payer, you can check, review all the documents, make sure that the floor plan is reflecting what the actual property is. So the final agreement, like I said, you have to sign before a public notary, because the notary will register the final agreement in a special registry, and that's when you will become the owner of your piece of land.
Well, thank you for that clarification there, and to go through and explain that process. But of course, if anybody is interested in more detailed information about the process, how it works, there are plenty of episodes that we've done as part of the Italian Real Estate Podcast on various aspects of this process to go and get your property or home, whatever it may be, in Italy. But just to move on to the land itself, is there anything specifically that a person needs to keep in mind when they are actually going through and making the purchase? Does the land have to be zoned in a certain way? If there's already a building on that property, can they knock that down, or do they have to keep it up? What are these things that a person needs to keep in mind when they are thinking about purchasing a piece of land and to be able to build on top of that property?
Yes, when building in Italy, the bureaucracy, as you can imagine, is not easy to navigate. So you may have to deal with zoning and environmental laws, building restrictions. So when you buy a piece of land, just make sure that you do your due diligence. And if you are from abroad, you may want to consider hiring an attorney, a lawyer like ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com, or maybe hire a local geometra, a surveyor who speaks English and can help you navigate the Italian bureaucracy, which, like I said, it's very peculiar and not easy to navigate when it comes to building properties in Italy. So first of all, you need a permit to build on the land. And also you have to make sure the plot of land that you're buying is in an area that the municipality has designated as an area, as a residential area where you can actually build a property. It's not unusual, especially if you're buying not within the city limits, but outside the city limits, that the land that you sell is maybe for agricultural use only, which doesn't necessarily mean that you cannot build a property there, but there may be different rules and restrictions. For example, if it's an agricultural area, you can build in your piece of land only if the land is big enough, according to the Italian law, to include both the house and the land used for agricultural purposes. And there's a specific size that the land must have. You could be able to overcome that problem if you buy a piece of land in an area that is designated as an agricultural area, if there is already a building, a property built on the land, in which case you can demolish the property and build a new one. So in Italy, the laws related to building properties are very peculiar and have to do a lot with the designation of the specific area, which is cited normally by the municipal offices, so the town in which the land is located.
So in that case, I would assume, like, say, for example, if somebody wants to buy a piece of land to be able to build on, and they want to put like a spare house, like a guest house, or an office space that's detached from the house, that you would have to have very specific permissions and zoning to allow that to be able to happen. I'm just making this assumption based on what you're saying about, like, it can for agricultural property, like only if it's there and there's so much space allowed. Is this the situation, or am I misunderstanding?
No, that's exactly the situation. Also, even if you're buying in an area that is designated as a residential area, so you buy your piece of land and you build your house, to build like a secondary property, maybe a guest house, you have to make sure that there's enough space. Because, for example, even for your primary house, you need to make sure that the house is not too far from the limits of your piece of land. So there needs to be like 5 meters or maybe 10 meters from your house to the limit of the land. Of course, that's established by the municipal offices. So the point is, there may not even be enough space for a guest house, especially because Italy, is very, the population density is quite high. So you will find yourself in a situation where likely you're buying a piece of land in a town that is not big enough for maybe a guest house. So you have to be sure to consider the fact that the piece of land that you're buying, even if it's in the residential area, may just be big enough for the primary house and not for the guest house. So a lot of considerations to be made when you are purchasing a piece of land in Italy with the purpose of building your house.
That's interesting. And so say somebody buys even a piece of property that maybe has nothing on that. Is it difficult to get the planning permissions to be able to build something? Do you have to plan? I mean, as like what you were saying, you have to make sure within certain sizes, but is the inside of any importance to the local council, or do they not really care? Is it kind of free in that aspect? How does that work?
Yeah, normally the inside doesn't really matter. The outside matters to some extent when you're building in a residential area. It matters a lot when you're building in an agricultural land, which, like I said before, needs to be a very large piece of land, especially with the current regulations, because you need to have enough space for both the property and the land that is designated for, agricultural purposes. And in that specific situation, when you're building on an agricultural land, there are tons of rules that you need to respect. The house needs to adapt to its surroundings, and you will see that, for example, in the agricultural areas, all the houses look alike. So you cannot build a house that is completely different from all the other houses that are in that area, and they all look alike because the regulations of that area, which is an agricultural area, dictate that you must build a house with those specific features. For example, you cannot build a house in an agricultural land with a flat roof. It needs to be, the classic Italian roof, or you cannot use rolling shutters, but you have to have the normal, Italian shutters that open. So a lot of rules need to be respected when you're building your property in a piece of land which is in an area which is designated for agricultural use only.
That is shocking, even down to the detail of what kind of shutters you have. Wow. I mean, I can understand it, especially because so many places have like a historical value, and to try to keep things looking in a traditional way instead of having maybe a foreign influence or too much of a modern influence. But I mean, clearly from what you said, I guess just to kind of summarize that, it sounds like what you're saying is that you can't get like the top international modern designer to come in and build you the most artistic future home in that type of situation.
Exactly. You can do so in a residential area. There will probably be still some limits in Italy that you have to respect, but in a residential area, you can kind of build any house that you want to build of any color and with however you want it to be. But in an agricultural area, you have to be sure to respect the rules, and the rules can be very strict.
I can imagine. But also, I'm curious though, what if you find a property and it has a house on there that you would like to knock down and then you would like to rebuild? Do you have to honor the original footprint of that house, or can you build something that is maybe in a different shape? Of course, respecting the limits of the property lines.
So the shape can be different, but the size of the house needs to be the same unless there are some laws that allow you to maybe expand the house by 20%. There are some laws in Italy that allow existing houses to be expanded by, I think the maximum is between 10 and 20%, depending on the law, depending on the area. But the answer to your question is the house can be moved in the piece of land. The shape can be different, but the size must be the same unless you can use one of these laws. Of course, in the event that they were not used before by the original owner, but if you can take advantage of these laws that allow you to make the house just a little bit bigger.
That's interesting. So I think there's going to be a lot of people who that may make the difference for if they're interested in, say, property A or property B when they're doing their search for the perfect place to plop down their home. It's very interesting. And from an Italian perspective, this all makes sense. And I'm just curious, though, having gone over all of this so far, we know that like in Italy that the property prices like for a home, if you're buying the property for the house specifically or for an apartment, can be quite reasonable. But of course, in some areas be quite expensive. What though, maybe comparing it to a home, like a home purchase, what should a person maybe expect to pay for just a piece of property or a property with a house that they're looking to just demolish?
Well, let's talk about pieces of land in a residential area first. As of this moment in time, with the cost of all of the material that you need to build a house, it tends to be a little bit more expensive to build a house right now rather than purchasing a house that is already built. But to answer your question, the cost of a plot of land which is big enough to build a house in Italy right now can range from, I think the lowest could be about 50,000 euros for a piece of land which is big enough for one house in a residential area. And of course, it could go up to, like 100, 200, 300 easily, depending on where you're buying your land. If you're buying your land in an area that is designated for residential use in a very famous city in Italy, the cost could go up almost without limits. But the lowest probably could be like 40 to 50,000 euros. In a town like Rovigo, for example, you're averaging 80,000 to 100,000 euros for a piece of land which is big enough for one house. Of course, the cost is much lower normally if you're buying a piece of land in an area that is designated for agricultural use. And that's, of course, because you have to continue to cultivate that land, and because there are so many restrictions in terms of what you can or cannot do when building a house in a property, which is in an area which is designated for agricultural use.
So just also something that's kind of hitting me as we're talking about this, that the cost of actually purchasing this land, because I think one of the reasons why a lot of people want to purchase a piece of property and then build on is maybe in some ways to save, but then also to have their home the way that they want it. But from these prices that you're kind of talking about, it sounds like it's going to be a lot more expensive than maybe sometimes even being able to find a home on its own, apartment on its own. Of course, it would cost more than an apartment, but it sounds as though this process of, or the price of purchasing the property and then building the home on top of it could actually land you in spending more than what you would spend if you were to buy a place that's already just built.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the answer is yes right now. And the reasons are, first of all, you buy a piece of land and you buy a land where you can build a house which will be how you want it to be. So you don't have to be forced to buy a house that somebody else built. So the ability to buy a piece of land and buy a piece of land where you can build a house however you want it to be comes at a price. And right now, I think it's more expensive, definitely more expensive to buy a piece of land and build a house than just buy a house that is already there.
Interesting. So I think that's really something to take into consideration if you're thinking about moving to Italy, or at least buying something that you can have there, that maybe financially it could make a little bit more sense to just buy a really wonderful property that almost is exactly what you want instead of going through everything and having to build something. But anyway, Marco, if somebody is looking for that property that is almost perfect, or that they're wanting to go and work with you guys to actually create the home of their dreams in Italy, how can they get in contact with you and your team?
People can contact us through our website, italianrealestatelawyers.com, or give us a call. The number is on the website.
Absolutely fantastic. And of course, if you're interested in more content like this about Italian real estate, purchasing in Italy, renting in Italy, moving to Italy, and also we've done a series on what different parts of Italy that we would consider, because we have our own opinions that we very much have preferences for certain parts of the country. Be sure to check out all of the episodes and make sure that you're subscribed to this channel, where you are also automatically subscribed to the Italian Citizenship Podcast, where we talk about some of the more legal aspects of being able to move to Italy, some of the practical tips and tricks of what you need to do. But of course, you can always subscribe to the audio only podcast on your favorite podcasting platform of choice. And of course, if you're interested in more about life abroad, living abroad as an Italian dual citizen expat, be sure to come over to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rafael Di Furia, where I talk about these aspects of living abroad and living in Europe as well. And of course, again, thank you so much to Marco from ItalianRealEstateLawyers.com. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy, and we will see you all next time. Later.
Thank you.